Good evening and welcome to all. Tonight's class, the most powerful human being, the most humble human being, on the essence of royalty from a Jewish perspective, is dedicated in honor of the birth of a son to Aryeh and Rezi Schattenstein by their brother-in-law and sister-in-law, David and Ida Schattenstein, Mazel Tov. Tonight's class is also dedicated by Neshei Chabad of New Haven in the loving memory of a dear friend, Chaya Tamar, Berta Bat Shabtai. May her memory be a blessing. Tehei Nishmata Tzrura B'Tzror HaChayim. So they tell the story about this Russian politician who addressed his constituents, and he said, "My dear friends, yesterday we stood at the edge of the abyss. Today we took a giant step forward." They tell another anecdote of an AT&T salesman who comes to a home, rings the bell, the guy comes to the door, yes. And the AT&T salesman says, I have this great new model to offer you. I'm looking for the master of the home. Can I please speak to the master of the home? And the guy tells him, you came exactly at the right moment. Wait up here 5 minutes because this exact question is being decided in the kitchen right now. Tonight, we explore the essence of leadership, the meaning of leadership. What does it take to be a leader? What is royalty, leadership, responsibility from a Jewish perspective? And we explore it via a fascinating episode in the Talmud and the Gemara. A seemingly simple episode demonstrates to us the essence of royalty. Open up your curriculum under the video to source number 1, Masechta Horayos Daf Yud Amud Aleph, Talmud Tractate Horayos, page 10a. The Talmud there tells the story of two of the greatest sages of Israel, living in the generation after the destruction of the Second Temple, in the 1st century after the Common Era, Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Joshua, who are both traveling on a boat. Zok de Gemara, source number 1. Ki ha, the Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua have a ozli b'sfinasa. Rabbi Gamliel and Rabbi Yehoshua were traveling on a boat. Bahad did Rabbi Gamliel have a pitta? Bahad did Rabbi Yehoshua have a pitta v'sulta? Rabbi Gamliel came along with bread. Rabbi Yehoshua came along with bread and flour. Shalom pitted Rabbi Gamliel, samech hasultid Rabbi Yehoshua. The journey was longer than expected, so the bread of Rabbi Gamliel was gone. He now relied on and he was sustained with the flour of his contemporary, of his colleague Rabbi Yehoshua. Amar lei, Rabbi Gamliel said to Rabbi Yehoshua, Mi have yadis. The Havalon ikuve kulahai the Asa Sulta. How did you know that this journey is going to be so procrastinated that you brought flour? Because for the bread gets moldy and you can't eat it anymore. So Rabbi Gamliel's bread, either it was finished or you couldn't eat it anymore. It wasn't edible. So Rabbi Yehoshua brought flour. So Rabbi Gamliel said, how do you know we're going to be on the boat for so long? It wasn't expected. Amar le, Rabbi Yehoshua told Rabbi Gamliel, Koich of echad l'shivim shana oila umates hasaponim v'amarti shemayala v'yat. Rabbi Yehoshua explained there is a star which emerges once every 70 years, and it confuses the captains of the ships. And I thought perhaps this is the time when the star is going to emerge and it will confuse the captain of our ship, and thus we will get lost in the waters, and our journey will be longer than expected. Now, what is fascinating about this, as a parenthetical note, is as many modern scholars have pointed out, that it seems like that Rabbi Yehoshua was addressing the famous Halley's Comet. What is astounding is, of course, Halley's Comet was named after Edmund Halley, the English astronomer who lived in the 1700s, in the 18th century, 1742. The comet was named after Halley because although the presence of this comet was known to astronomers yet in 240 before the Common Era, but Halley was the first astronomer to figure out that there is a rhythm, there is a regularity. Once in 75, 76 years, the comet comes around. Last time we saw the comet in 1986, we saw Halley's Comet. And the fact that 1,500 years earlier, Rabbi Yehoshua could say that once in 70 years, or approximately in 70 years, a star will emerge to confuse and can confuse the captains, is nothing less than astounding. So in any case, Rabbi Yehoshua tells Rabbi Gamliel, the captains steer the direction of the ship based on the fixed stars, the constellations in the heavens which they observe. This one is on the north, this one is on the south, this one is on the east, this one is on the west, and based on that, they figure out the direction they're going. But here, the comet, the star, may confuse the process and the journey. The captain thus may become confused and the journey will be longer than expected. I knew this is the time that this star comes up, and therefore I brought flour into the boat. Omar Leirem Gamliel told Rabbi Yehoshua, Kol kach biyodcha v'atoyle b'svina. You have so much information in your mind, and you're traveling on a boat to earn a living with such depth, with such genius, with such scholarship. This is how you have to work. You have to work so hard to earn a living. Amar Lei, Rabbi Yehoshua tells him, Ad shata tamalai tamal shnei talmidim sheyesh lecha b'yabasha. Rebbe Lezer ben Chisma, Rebbe Lezer Chisma, v'Rebbe Yochanan ben Gudgada, sheyoidin l'shayir kama tipois yesh bayam, ve'ein lehem pas lechel v'loi beged lilbush. Rabbi Yehoshua tells Rabbi Gamliel, before you ask questions about me and my career, why don't you wonder about two students who you have on dry land? Rabbi Eliezer Chisma and Rabbi Yochanan, the son of Gudgada. These are two people who can estimate how many drops are in the ocean. And yet, they have no bread to eat and no clothes to wear. Rabbi Gamliel decided to designate these two sages, these two rabbis, as leaders in the community. Kisha'Allah, where Rabbi Gamliel came up from the oceans to dry land, Shalach lahem v'loi bo. He sent them a message to come to him. He summoned them, and they did not come. Chazar v'shalach ubo. He summoned them a second time, and this time they came. Omar lahem, Reb Gamliel told them, Kimedumin atem sheshrara ani noisen lachem, avdus ani noisen lachem. The reason you did not come the first time when I summoned you, was it because you thought that I am conferring rulership on you? No, I am conferring service on you. You thought I'm summoning you to give you a position of authority, of leadership, of shrara, of rulership. And that's why you refused. You're humble. You don't want the position. You think I'm giving you a position of rulership. I'm giving you a position of servitude. I'm conferring avdus upon you. Shenemar. And Reb Gamliel continues with a verse. A pasuk from Melachim, the book of Kings 1, Melachim Aleph, chapter 12. Vayidabru elov leimer, they told him, Im hayoim tia eved la'om hazeh, etc. If you will be a slave, a servant today to this nation. This is the verse Rabbi Gamliel brings as a support. I am not conferring rulership on you. I am conferring service, avdus, on you. And that's the end of the story. Which pasuk, which verse is Rabbi Gamliel referring to in this story in Tractate Horius? It's that dramatic story in the book of Kings, Melachim Aleph, chapter 12. Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, the great king of Israel, passed away. During Shlomo's days, the Jewish people flourished. The Jewish country flourished. The Beis HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, was built in Jerusalem. Shlomo HaMelech introduced a time of peace, of serenity, of tranquility, of tremendous wealth and affluence in the Jewish commonwealth. But Shlomo HaMelech also placed heavy taxation on the Jewish population, both financial as well as personal. Many Jews, tens of thousands, were drafted in the work of building and constructing the Beis HaMikdash as described at length in the Tanakh. Shlomo HaMelech passes on, and he is succeeded by his son, Rechavam. This is the scene behind Kings 1, Melachim Aleph, Perek Yud Beis, chapter 12. And you can open up your curriculum to source number 2. Here we have the story. Rechavam goes to the city of Shechem, where the Jewish people came to coronate him as a king. There is a delegation headed by a man named Yehoshua, the son of Nevat, with many other Jews, who approach the king Rechavam. And they tell him these words, Pasuk Dalet, Avicha hiksha esuleinu, va'ata, hakel me'avodas avicha hakasha, u'me'ulei hakavod asher nasan aleinu v'na'avdeka. Your father, Shlomo, imposed a very heavy yoke on us. We're asking you now, lighten up the excruciating labor which your father imposed on us, and we will serve you. The new king Rechavam tells them, give me 3 days to consider your request and come back to me. What does he do during these 3 days? He consults 2 groups of people. Rechavam consults the elderly statesmen who were yet loyal to his father Shlomo HaMelech when he was alive, and he asks them, how should I respond to the request of the people that I should lighten up the burden? I should come down I shouldn't come down so hard on them. I should be much easier with them. They respond to him and they tell him Pasuk Zayin, Melachim Aleph Yud Beis, Pasuk Zayin. Take a look. Vayidabru elav leimer, they tell him, Im hayoim tia eved la'am hazeh va'avadatam. If today you will be a servant to the nation, and you will serve them, va'anisam v'dibarta aleim dvarim toivim, v'hoyu lecha avadem kol hayamim, and you respond to them and you tell them kind and pleasant things, then they will serve you for all the days of your life. This is the advice the elderly statesmen give the new king Rechavam. If you be a servant to them today, they will become servants to you. They will be loyal and subject themselves to your authority and rulership. It's this verse Rabbi Gamliel was quoting to those 2 great sages, Rabbi Elazar Chismer, Rabbi Yochanan ben Gundgada. You think I'm giving you rulership? I'm giving you service. I'm conferring servitude on you. And he quotes the first half of this verse. You will be a servant today to this nation. But let's go back to the story. What happens? Rechavam rejects the advice of the elderly statesman. He consults his old buddies, the little kids he grew up with when he was a young boy, who are now there with him as advisors, as his friends. And he asks them, what should I tell the people? And this is what they say, Pasuk Yud. The children who grew up with him tell him these words. Speak to the people who told you your father imposed such a heavy burden on us. Lighten the burden. Remove the burden. This is what you should tell them. My little finger is thicker than the thighs of my father, than the waist of my father. My little finger is thicker than the waist of my father. Va'ata, avi hemis aleichem oil covered, va'ani oisif al ulchem. Avi yisareschem b'shoitim, va'ani ayasareschem ba'akrabim. My father imposed on you a heavy burden. I will increase your burden. My father whipped you, afflicted you with whips, and I will afflict you with scorpions. 3 days later, Yehoshua and the people come back to Rechavam. He rejects the advice he received from the elderly statesman. He embraces the advice he received from the young chevra. And he tells them those words. My father was hard on you, I will yet be harder on you. My father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions. The result of the story? A mutiny, a revolt. The people reject the rulership of Rechavam as their king. They appoint a new king, Yehoshua the son of Nevat. He establishes his kingdom in the north of Israel, while Rechavam establishes his kingdom in the south of Israel. Only one tribe, Yehuda and Benjamin, remain loyal to Rechavam. The rest of the 10 tribes follow Yehoshua. There is now a split in the political and national infrastructure of the Jewish people. It's a split that they never healed. Ultimately, it leads to the destruction of the 10 tribes and ultimately to the destruction of the whole Commonwealth a few hundred years later. This is the famous split caused at this moment in history between Malchus Yehuda and Malchus Yisrael, the kingdom of Judea under Rechavam, the son of Shlomo, the son of David, and the kingdom of Israel under the leadership of Yehoshua ben Nevat from the tribe of Ephraim, from the tribe of Joseph. Let's examine for a moment what was the nature of the advice the elder statesman gave Rechavam, the advice he did not obey, the perspective he rejected. What did they tell him? Go back to source number 2. Take a look at Pasuk Zayin once again. What do they tell him? Im hayoim tiyeh le'eved le'om hazeh v'avadatem. If today you will be a servant to this nation and serve them, then then they will become your servants. What is the nature of this advice? We can explain it 2 ways. One is the interpretation given by the famous biblical commentator, the Malbim, and other commentators. The Malbim believes that the advice of the elderly statesman in theme, in content, was similar to the advice of the youngsters. The difference was only intact in approach, not in substance. What they were saying is, in the beginning, you have to please the people. Initially, you have to demonstrate your readiness to acquiesce to them, to accept their demands, to embrace their requests. And ultimately, once you lure them into your trap, then they'll become servants for you for the rest of your life. So in the beginning of your kingship, when you're young, when you're inexperienced, make sure to please them. Behave as though you were their servant. If you behave as their servant now, then tomorrow, next year, in 5 years, the facts were established. Now they will become your servants. Yet, if this is the case, come back to the story of Rabbi Gamliel on the boat, together with Rabbi Yehoshua in source number 1 in Tractate Horius. When he comes up from the water and he summons those 2 sages and they don't want to come, they don't want to be leaders, and he tells them, you think I am conferring upon you rulership? I am conferring upon you service. Shrara ani noisen lachem, avdus ani noisen lachem. Shenemar, he brings a verse, which pasuk? Im hayoim tiyeh eved la'am hazeh. If today you will be a servant to this nation, demonstrating, what does a king have to do? A king must first and foremost be a servant to the people. But if the Malbim's interpretation is correct, Reb Gamliel's proof is very problematic, because all they were telling him is, you should behave today as though you were a servant for the people, and then they will become your servants. In fact, if you look in the Gemara in source number 1, Reb Gamliel only brings the first half of the verse. He deletes the second half of the verse. Great. So you bring proof from a verse. How? By taking it out of context and not quoting the second half. That's called proof. What's the second half of the pasuk? The whole pasuk reads, they told him, Im hayoim tiyeh eved la'am hazeh. If today you will demonstrate servitude to the nation, you will demonstrate loyalty to them, you will surrender to their wills, then v'hayu lecha avadim kol hayamim, then they will become your servants. Reb Gamliel doesn't quote the second half. He tells the 2 guys, he tells the 2 great sages, you think I'm giving you rulership? I'm conferring service upon you. How do I know? If today you will be a servant to this nation, but the second half of the verse says, then they will become your servants. He doesn't even quote that. Indeed, according to the Malbim, he can't quote that. Because this actually demonstrates that the Pasuk is saying something else. They're not telling him you should become a real servant to the people. They're telling him you have to have tact, you have to have seichel, you have to have logic, you have to know how to do it. You can't in one shot just demonstrate strength and vigor and authority and say, I'm the boss and that's it. You'll be rejected immediately. You have to do it slowly. You have to do it with tact. Granted. So how does Rabbi Gamliel bring this verse as a support to the idea he's trying to convey to these sages? The truth is, there's another way of understanding what the elders told Rechavam. They were not telling him, if you will be a servant today, they will become servants tomorrow. If you give in today, they will give in tomorrow. If you demonstrate softness today, they will become soft tomorrow. He's telling them actually the same thing. If you will become a servant to them, they will become your servants, not as a strategic approach, but rather, if you will be a servant to them, then you will be deserving of them becoming servants of yourself. In order to understand this, let us open up source number 3 and see how the Rambam, Maimonides, describes a king, a Jewish king. Rambam Hilchos Melachim, Perek Beis. The second chapter in the Laws of Kings, Zakter Rambam, and I quote, Kiderech shecholak loy lemelech hakosov hakoved hagadol v'chiv hakol bekvoidoi. Kach tzivohu liyas liboi bekirboi shafal v'cholol shnemar v'libi cholol bekirbi. Just as the Torah gives the king, confers upon the king great honor, and obligates all of the Jewish people to respect and honor the king in this week's portion, Shoftim, in the same way, the Torah instructs the king to remain humble in his heart, devoid of arrogance. And the Rambam continues, he should not behave in too much of a pompous or arrogant way towards the Jewish people. Shenemar, the verse says in Parsha Shoftim, lebilti rum levave meyechav. He should not exalt his heart over his brothers. He should be graceful and compassionate to smaller people, to greater people, to young, to old. He should care for their desires, for their welfare. He should be sensitive to the respect of even the smallest of people, the smallest child. When he speaks to the whole population publicly, he should speak in a soft fashion. And the Rambam brings which pasuk? Va'omer im hayoim tia eved la'am hazeh. The verse from Malachim, Perek Yud Beis. If you will be a servant to the people. And the Rambam continues, he should always be very humble. He should learn from Moshe Rabbeinu, from Moses, how a king ought to behave. The Rambam's words are very meticulous. His grammar, his diction, his style, impeccable, flawless. There is something strange in the way the Rambam phrases this law. He begins, Kiderech shecholak loy lemelech hakosov hakoved hagadol v'chiyav hakol bekvoidei, kach tzivo liyas liboy bekirboy shafal v'chala. Just as the Torah confers upon the king great honor and obligates everybody to respect the king tremendously, in the same way the Torah instructs the king to be very humble. Kiderech kach. Just as the Torah gives this mitzvah, the Torah gives a second mitzvah. Why does the Rambam not only juxtapose the two, but actually puts them in one sentence as though they were the same thing, when really we're dealing with two very opposite mitzvahs and two very opposite notions? It would be more logical for the Rambam to say this: despite the fact that the Torah tells us all to respect the king and confers great honor upon the king, notwithstanding that, the king must remain humble. Or the Rambam could give two separate laws. The Torah demands from everybody to confer tremendous respect upon the king. The Torah also demands the king to remain humble. But the way the Rambam does it in a single flow and sentence, saying, Kederech kach, just as the Torah tells us to respect the king in the same way the Torah tells him to remain humble, sounds like the two are connected. They're two very separate and opposite notions. The king has to work very hard on himself. Despite the fact that he's a king and he's a leader and everybody respects him and the Torah respects him, still he must be humble. Yet the Rambam puts it together in a single flow, just as everybody has to respect him, in the same way the king has to be humble. What do you mean in the same way? Just as everybody respects him, that's how he has to be humble? It's two separate experiences, two opposite notions, it's two opposite sentiments which he has to cultivate and work on and so forth. 1931, Sukkot, Simchas Beis HaShoeva, middle of Sukkot. The year in Hebrew is Tafresh Tzadik Beis. It's a year of Hakel in the Jewish calendar, just like this year, Tafshin Samach Tes 5769. And in Poland, a young man comes to visit his father-in-law. The sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, is visited by his son-in-law. His son-in-law at the time lived in Berlin. And he came to Poland for Yom Tov to be with his father-in-law. This is his second son-in-law, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who would later succeed his father-in-law as the seventh Lubavitcher Rebbe. He holds a public gathering of Habrengen, as they call a Hasidic gathering, with the guests and the students in the yeshiva on Sukkot 1931, the year of Hakel. To our fortune, he also transcribes his words. That night, it was an all-nighter, as I heard from somebody who attended it. And later, when they discovered this journal from the Rebbe, years later, in 1994, was published in a volume known as Rishimos, Volume 7. And there, the Rebbe asks this question on the words of the Rambam, transcribing what he spoke at the Fabrengen, at the gathering on Sukkot 1931, Tafresh Tzadik Beis. And he says that with this description, the great eagle, Rabbeinu Moshe ben Maimon, the Rambam, captures the essence of royalty and leadership from a Jewish perspective. The Rambam is telling us the humility that a king and a leader must have, commanded in Parshas Shoftim, lebilti rum levave meyachav, not to be arrogant, not to be pompous, not to develop a sense of gaiva, the opposite of humility, is not just a mitzvah, an instruction. Whoever has power, a person in power, must also be humble, must be human, must be sensitive, must be kind, must be menschlich. If not, you have a monster. You have a dangerous person. The Rambam is telling us that the humility of the king actually is an essential component of his rulership. It's not just a detail, it's not just a necessity, it's not just a mitzvah, it's not even an essential mitzvah. Furthermore, it actually constitutes the very essence of what it means to be a king. What is a king? What is a leader? What gives a king, a leader, his power, his authority, his ability to rule a nation? It's the fact that he is completely, unequivocally dedicated to the nation. No ego, no sense of I'm in it for me, from my own self-aggrandizement, even for my own self-fulfillment, even for my own self-expression. It's not about me. I am a servant to the people. This is about the people. It's not about me. The king, therefore, must be selflessly dedicated to the will of God, to his mission in life, to lead the nation. Therefore, the Rambam says, just as the Torah commands us to respect the king, and the Torah confers great respect on the king. In the same way, the king has to be very humble, because both of these qualities, the importance to respect the king and the importance for the king to be humble, are actually identical. They both stem from the same cause. Why should we give a king respect? Why does God confer so much glory, so much honor on a king? Why does the Torah demand from all of us to truly respect the king? Why? Why him? He's a human being like you and me. And the answer is because he's humble. Because it's not about him. Because he's completely selfless. If the king is about his ego, his self-aggrandizement, his power, his empire, you have no reason to respect him. There's certainly no reason that the creator of the world would tell us in the Torah that we have to respect the king and would confer true great glory and honor on the king. There's no reason for it. If it's about his ego, it's about his ego. Why would the Torah respect him? The reason the king ought to be respected is because the real king among the Jewish people, the model of a true king. What is a king from the expectation and the point of view of Torah? Is somebody who's completely surrendered, more than another human being. Other people live their own life. The king surrenders himself completely to the King of Kings. He surrenders his ego, he surrenders his glory, he surrenders his power completely to the will and the presence of God, completely to the needs and the benefits of the people. That his whole identity now constitutes service. Who am I? I'm an Eved. I'm a slave. I'm a servant. That's the reason the king has power. The reason the Torah gives the king power is because he's powerless. This is the real king. This is the real leader. And the more powerless he is, the more power he has. And the more humble he is, the greater respect he deserves. And the more selfless he is, the more presence of self he has. And the more he surrenders, the more he could command respect. At the surface, these two are contradictory components. And you say, despite the fact that he's powerful and glorious and charismatic and charming and can run a country with tremendous success and people look up to him and follow him blindly or not blindly, despite the fact he's still menschlich, he's still human, he's still humble. That's not what the Rambam says. The Rambam says it's the same thing. Just as the Torah confers respect upon him, the Torah also says he must be humble. Because the only reason the Torah confers respect on him is if he's a king. What makes him a king, what makes him so respectful is that it's not about him. He represents something transcendent. He transcends himself for the sake of God, for the sake of the nation, for the sake of the people. And therefore in him, the entire nation can find their own place of transcendence. Within him, the entire nation can find the point where we each transcend our own individual ego and we become integrated and synthesized. The king, the Rambam says elsewhere, you can look it up in your curriculum, in your source. The Rambam says in Hilchos Malachim, HaMelech hu leiv kol kahal Yisrael. The king is the heart in which the diverse components of the Jewish people come together in the heart. Rashi says in Parsha Chukas, HaNasi hu hakol, the leader constitutes everybody. What do you mean the king is the heart? Or the leader constitutes everybody? It means that the king represents that point in which we each transcend our individual ego, our individual selves, and we become one by sensing the point within each of us which transcends our ego, our source in one nation, in one people, in one identity, in one God. The king does that to himself, he can bring it out in everybody else. If the king does not do that within himself, if the king didn't transcend himself, if it's all about the king's empire and power and authority and rulership, How can he bring that out to the people? How can he bring that out in the people? Ego attracts egos. Humility inspires humility. Selflessness inspires selflessness. Surrender inspires surrender. That's why we respect the king. That's why we must surrender to the king. Because we're not surrendering to the king. We're surrendering to God. But if the king did not surrender to God, if the king never gave up his dream for self-aggrandizement, there's nothing truly to respect here. He's a human being of flesh and blood who's here today and will be gone tomorrow. But if the king nullifies his identity to God, when we nullify our ego to the king, we're not nullifying it to a king because the king has no ego. We're nullifying it to God as well. This is what the Rambam is saying. And fascinatingly, this is expressed in a law. You'll open up your next source in the curriculum. Zog the Gemara Brachas Daf Lamed Daled Amud Beis. We know when a Jew prays, we bow down to God, we prostrate ourselves to God. And the Talmud says we do it in the beginning of the Amidah and towards the end. We say Baruch Ata. We bend our knees, we bow down. Baruch Ata Hashem. And then we stand straight for the remainder of the Amidah, for the remainder of the prayer. But there is an exception when it comes to a king. Zog the Gemara, HaMelech Kiven Shekara Shuvene Zoykef. A king, once he prostrates himself in the beginning of the prayers, he does not lift his head again till the end of the prayers. How do we know? A verse about whom? Shlomo HaMelech. Shneimar, Vayihi kechlois Shlomo li'yispalel, kam lifnei mizbech Hashem ichraya al birkav. Only when Shlomo finished the entire prayers did he get up from his knees. An ordinary human being prays and you prostrate yourself in the beginning, but then you stand straight, erect. A king, once he places his head down in the beginning of the Amidah, Baruch Atah Hashem, the head remains in a state, in a position of surrender to God throughout the whole prayer until he finishes praying. Rashi says why? Rashi explains in Brachas, the greater you are, the more humble you have to be. According to the above explanation, we understand that there is even a greater depth here, which we have to appreciate in the words of Rashi. It's not just the greater you are, the more dangerous you are, the more afraid we have to be from you, the more humble you have to be, because people who have power can be very dangerous people. I don't have to elaborate on this. This is the story of history. Tragically, unfortunately, we know that many kings, or most kings, did not live up to this model and this expectation, including many Jewish kings, as the Tanakh so often describes the various kings. What the Talmud is truly telling us is, it's not just people of power have to be humble, especially humble. It's far deeper. What makes you a person who deserves power is the fact that you're humble. From a Torah perspective, what allows you to have power? Why ought you to be respected so profoundly? What gives you the justification to rule over an entire nation with the tremendous powers that the Torah grants to a king? Why? The answer is only complete bittul. The king has no agenda connected to his own ego. It's not about him. It's not about me. It's not about my personality. It's not about my popularity. It's not about my fame. It's not about my money. It's not about my aggression or my power. It's not about me. Because it's not about me, because the king is completely surrendered to God, represented by the fact that his head is down throughout the whole prayer. Everybody else is standing, and he's down. He's completely surrendered. If that's the case, now he can be given respect. Now there's a justification for him to have the power. This is back to the story, how Rabbi Gamliel understood the statement, the advice that the elder statesmen of Shlomo HaMelech, of King Solomon, were giving Rechavam. Back to that pasuk. They told him, Im ata tiya hayoim eved la'am hazeh. If you will become today, im hayoim tiya eved la'am hazeh, if you will today become a servant to this nation, they will become servants to you. He is not only giving them they're not only giving him a clever approach, you give in today and you'll lure them into your trap. He's saying much deeper. He's saying something much deeper. If you want them to become your servants, they have to see that you are their servants. The reason why a Jew ought to serve a king, the reason why we should be an eved to a king, the reason I should surrender my individuality to the king is only if the king has completely surrendered his individuality to me, to the people, to the creator of the world, to the king of kings. The reason the king is entrusted with so much power is because all the power is not about him. He's an eved. He's a servant. He's a servant of the people. And therefore he represents the collective identity of the people, the sanctity of the people, the unity of the people, the point in which we graduate and we mature from our fragmentation, our divisiveness, our dichotomy, and we congeal into a seamless whole because of the inner spirituality, the godliness within each and every human being which unites the world and creates an organic place. And this soul within every Jew which allows each Jew to really be connected and one with the other person, and who embodies that soulfulness, who embodies that space beyond the ego, the space of transcendence. This is embodied and epitomized fully within the king, who completely transcended his ego and went into his soul, to that place of selflessness to God within himself, and therefore in him the people can be united. So they tell Rechavam, you want them to serve you? They have to feel that you're an eved. You're a servant. You're a complete servant. If you're a servant, you can have servants, because it's not about you. When they're serving you, they're not serving you. They're serving that which you represent, that which you embody, that which you allude to. In you, they see the embodiment of Torah, of truth, of ethics, of goodness, of godliness. And when they see that in you, they surrender to you, because it's not you. You're completely humble. They tell the story about a rabbi of a great city, but the rabbi himself was very physically, very slim, very short, but a very powerful leader. And you know, as many rabbis, there are always the ones who oppose the rabbi, the ones who have to persecute the rabbi, the one who always have something to say about the rabbi. How not, especially in the Jewish world. So there were the cynics who once came to the rabbi and say, you know, how do you think a guy like you, so short, so slim, how can you lead such a city, such a community? And he said, Ich ben efsher a klein sheker, aber the benkel is a größer. I may be very small, but the cheer is a large cheer. A true leader understands it's not about me. It's about the cheer. It's about what do I represent. It's about the truth I am conveying. And if I embody this truth, if this truth becomes me, if it becomes one with me, then this person can be a real leader. Then this person can be a real king. Then this person could be a real master. This is the real essence of leadership. This is the real essence of royalty. Transcendence, humility. So Rabbi Gamliel uses this pasuk, this verse, from the elderly statesman of Shlomo HaMelech to Rechavam, to explain to Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yochanan what is it that he is conferring upon them. when he's appointing them to become leaders of the Jewish people, because Rabbi Gamliel was the head of the Sanhedrin, he was the head of the Jewish Supreme Court, what he's telling them is, Kimeduma, atem sheshrarani noisalachem. You think I'm conferring rulership over you, upon you? Avdus ani noisalachem. I'm turning you into avadim. I'm conferring service upon you. When you become a leader of the Jewish people, first and foremost, you're an eved of the Jewish people. You're a servant. You're completely surrendered. This is what defines the great kings of Israel. Shlomo HaMelech, David HaMelech. You look at the story of David HaMelech, two personalities. In Tanakh, aggressive warrior. In Tehillim, completely humble, calls himself a worm. The two are not contradictory. They're actually the very same reality. The great sages who initially refused to become leaders, notwithstanding their difficult economic status, felt that when you become a leader, there is corruption involved. There are dangers involved. And Rabbi Gamliel explained to them that a real leader is somebody who understands that first and foremost, he embodies the will of God. He embodies the moral values of Torah. He embodies the needs and the necessities of the Jewish people. He embodies their soul. This is the essence of leadership from a Jewish perspective. Have a good night.